The torts question from February of 1997 is a classic products liability fact pattern, and you can learn an awful lot from this fact pattern about how to approach and analyze products liability claims. And we can tell this is a products question just by looking at the call. Have a look at it. On what theory or theories might Peters recover damages from, and what defenses may reasonably be raised by Conco, discuss, Bladeco, discuss, Homeco, discuss. Well, just the names of these three defendants and the fact that all of them are facing claims brought by one civil plaintiff is enough for us to make an educated guess that products liability will be at issue. And remember, products liability is not itself a theory of liability. It's an umbrella which contains beneath it several theories of liability. Those theories include strict products liability, negligence, and breach of warranty. It's quite common on bar exam essay questions in California and elsewhere for the examiners to be expecting an applicant to be able to compare and contrast all three of these different products liability theories among different defendants. And that is exactly the game that's going on here. This is a straightforward, relatively simple and standard products liability fact pattern. Like many of them, it's a racehorse. Completing a literate, thoughtful answer to this question in 1 hour is a real effort. So let's have a look at the fact pattern, and please join me at the top of the question. Peters is our plaintiff. He is a suburban homeowner, and he decided to resurface with bricks the concrete areas surrounding his pool. He purchased from Homeco, our third defendant, a local home improvement store, a concrete cutter manufactured by Conco, our first defendant, which had a blade manufactured by Bladeco, our second defendant. Now, one collateral lesson we may learn from this fact pattern is, if you become rich enough to have a pool, hire somebody to do this work. Nothing but harm is going to come to this plaintiff. Okay, so our suburban homeowner takes the concrete cutter home. He puts it together following the instructions provided by Conco. End of paragraph 1. That's a background paragraph. If we didn't intuit earlier that this was a products question, this first paragraph gives us little doubt about what's going to happen. This guy clearly is about to get hurt by this blade. He's going to be suing everybody for his injuries. And we already know that there are some differences in liability, at least as to negligence and warranty, among the different defendants. It is likely all of them are going to be strictly liable. But let's read on and see what happens. In paragraph 2, the blade that Peters purchased was clearly labeled wet, but just the word wet. No instructions or warnings came with the blade. Conco included several warnings throughout the instructions for the concrete cutter, stating, if using with wet blade, frequently water the blade and surface being cut to avoid risk of blade degradation. No other warnings relating to the blade were included with the concrete cutter. Well, we already know that that is not a very good warning. It presupposes that the user knows when to use water to a cutting job. And a good warning would have gone into enough depth to put us on notice as to what we need to do. So move on to paragraph 3. Here our plaintiff begins to cut the concrete with the concrete cutter and without using water. Less than 5 minutes into the job, he notices the cutter is vibrating excessively. That's when a reasonable person quits. But this plaintiff is not that reasonable, and he's not that smart. Instead, he turns the machine off by hitting the kill switch. Now read carefully. The kill switch is located near the blade at the bottom of the cutter with his right foot. Well, that looks like a design defect right now, even though it has not yet caused harm. Reading on. The cutter's hander did not have a kill switch. That looks like an obvious design defect. So now we can just start counting up the various problems with this device. It's got an inadequate warning, and it's got a badly positioned kill switch. But read on. After carefully examining the concrete cutter and blade, as opposed to doing it carelessly, Peters became convinced that nothing was wrong and continued to operate it. Nevertheless, within seconds, the concrete cutter again began vibrating violently. Okay, So maybe this guy has just made a mistake in starting the cutter a second time. But does this really rise to an assumption of the risk? Does it really rise to a significant level of contributory or comparative fault? Well, that's an area where reasonable people can differ. Here, although I admit that I have something of a pro-defense bias, even I would have to grant that there are significant products liability issues presented by this set of facts. Just the ones we know so far, and it gets worse. Now, finally, we get the next paragraph with damages. Peters reached with his right foot to hit the kill switch. The blade broke into pieces, forcing off the cutter's safety guard, spiraling into Peters' right foot, and caused permanent injuries. Okay, well, let's stop again. Here we've got yet another problem with this cutter. Not only does it have a bad warning, not only does it have a badly located kill switch, but it also has a bad safety guard. A proper safety guard should be able actually to guard the person operating the machine from the cutter's blade hurting him. So we've got plenty of problems with this product, and our job is going to be to narrowly and specifically identify and consider each of them in our answer. Then we get the call of the question again. We've got 3 defendants and 1 plaintiff. Now, we already intuited, really going into this fact pattern, what the theories of liability would be. And our intuition wasn't disappointed. It was reasonable, and it proved to be accurate. But now take a look at how I organize an answer to this problem. You're going to see that I don't really do anything much more elaborate than we were able to do at the time we first read the call of the question. So have a look at the first lawsuit, Peters versus Conco. It's a products liability claim. But notice the 3 different theories underneath it. Strict liability, based on the manufacturing defect, the design defect, the warning, damages, and defenses. Next, with regard to the negligence theory of products liability, here it's really just a negligence claim. So we rehearse the basic elements: duty, breach, causation, damages, and defenses. Here, the defense actually does have something to say: contributory or comparative fault, or assumption of risk. Now, I happen to think that both of these defenses have a little bit of merit, but I don't think they're necessarily winners. Next, we consider the third products theory of liability, warranty, and we reach a conclusion. Next, we consider Peters versus Bladeco, and here again, all I use for headings are the theories of liability: strict liability, negligence, and warranty. I've got a heading for defenses and then a conclusion. And I use exactly the same format for my analysis of Peters versus Homeco. This problem sort of presupposes that a candidate knows how to organize his or her answer. If you don't have this clear template for products liability in your mind, you better get it there pretty quickly. This is a commonly tested set of issues. They are tested in a ritualistic fashion every time, over and over again. And this answer, I think you'll agree, is focused, well-organized, and literate. If we had to spend a lot of time figuring out how we were going to do it, that certainly would compromise our ability to do the analysis. This is not a simple question to write an answer for, even though it is a comparatively simple question to organize an answer for, assuming you know what you're doing. So now let's take a few minutes and let me highlight a few points from this model answer. Have a look at the very first thing I write in the first paragraph. Here, I lead with the facts. I indicate that this plaintiff suffered permanent injuries when the blade forced off the cutter's safety guard and spiraled into his foot. I focus on Peters as an appropriate plaintiff to bring a products liability action, and I indicate who the proper defendants would be. Conco's a proper defendant because it manufactured the cutter that the plaintiff used. I focus first on the strict liability theory, and that's the strongest theory, which is why I lead with it. It is not essential, but I do think it's good practice to try to arrange the theories of liability in a descending order of importance, and lead off with the primary theory of liability. The reason it's a good idea is because, number one, it shows the grader that you appreciate what the strongest theory of liability might be, and, more subtly, this is how we practice law in real-life litigation. When we're going to court, we lead our lawsuit with the strongest and most impressive theory of liability. we'll put the wrongful death claim way ahead of the trespass to chattels claim, and that's how you should organize your answers. So, next we focus on strict liability. You'll see, up front, I lead off with the law. I indicate what strict liability is, and I think you'll see this may be my longest definition in torts or in any other subject here in the Master Essay Method online workshops. Still, I am not reciting the law in boilerplate form, and I'm focusing on the facts, principally. When I get to the design or manufacturing defect, you'll see I've got a separate paragraph for each one of them, although I choose not to organize it further internally. We focus on the inadequate warning, and you'll see here I do some fairly careful analysis. This is where the points live, where the facts and the law touch one another, and that's why I spend a fair amount of time analyzing this issue. With regard to damages, I put it in a simple declarative sentence. There's no damages issue presented by this fact pattern. We are told that there are permanent injuries. We're not given any financial data. All we are told is that he was hurt permanently, and that's good enough to establish that there are damages sufficient to support a theory of liability. Next, we focus on defenses, and here the defense actually does have something to say. We can point out all of the facts that come from the fact pattern about how our plaintiff should have been put on notice that there was a significant problem. But instead, he continues to act and use this product anyway. I consider the defendant's actions to be less than brilliant, but in the end, even I don't think they're sufficient to cause the defendant to escape strict liability in torts. So I conclude that Conco is strictly liable for Peter's injuries. Next, we focus on negligence, and here I don't really lead with the definition, but I do indicate that the plaintiff is going to claim that his injuries also were proximately caused by the negligence of the defendant. And then I do what we always do for a negligence problem. I go through duty, breach, causation, and damages, and the defenses offered by the defendant. And here, perhaps we would choose to make the causation analysis a little bit more complicated than I have done. A lot of successful papers had more to say about causation than I do. I chose to put most of those issues that could have gone to causation under defenses. And I think you can see how they well could have been placed as a part of a proximate cause analysis. It wouldn't be an unreasonable way to go, but I think it's better, and to my way of thinking, it makes a little bit more sense to put them down as defenses. Then I consider warranty. Briefly, I don't think there's a lot to analyze with regard to warranty, and the bottom line as to Conco is Peters prevails, as far as I'm concerned, under all of his products liability theories. Next we turn to Bladeco. Once again we focus on the parties. Peters was hurt by the product, so he's an appropriate plaintiff. Bladeco is a proper defendant because it manufactured the blade that broke and injured this plaintiff. So we focus on the theories of liability. Here, I squish all of them together, strict liability, negligence, and warranty. I just don't think there's a great deal that distinguishes the claim that Peters brings against Bladeco from the one he brings against Conco. I focus a little bit more on the defective warning, but with regard to defenses, all I do here is incorporate by reference. I think Bladeco's defenses are identical to Conco's, and therefore I don't waste any time or space repeating the analysis. I conclude that Bladeco is going to be liable for the injuries of the plaintiff, and that Bladeco is going to seek indemnity and contribution from Conco. Fair enough. Finally, we consider the lawsuit between Peters and Homco. Once again, I focus on the plaintiff and the defendant to establish the legitimacy of the action on a fairly basic level. Then, once again, I combine the theories of liability. I've only got one paragraph for strict liability, negligence, and warranty because, once again, all we're doing here is distinguishing Homco from the other two defendants, and we've already considered those lawsuits. Homco is strictly liable in tort for selling a product that had manufacturing and design defects or defective warnings. But Homco did not have the duty to inspect or test this product, so it is not going to be liable for negligence. Plus, I don't think they're likely to be considered liable for warranty because the manufacturers appeared to have more clearly violated the obvious warranties. Now, I admit, reasonable people can differ on that point. The defenses that Homco will assert are identical to those of Conco and Bladeco. The bottom line here is slightly different than that we reached for the other two defendants. Homco does face strict liability for the plaintiff's injuries, but Homco is not going to be liable under negligence or warranty. Homco also is going to seek indemnification from the two defendants that manufactured the product. And that wraps up a consideration of a very standard, classic products liability fact pattern.